Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of How To series from Canopy Community. Today, we're going to talk about how to lead a startup or your startup during these uncertainty times. In the next hour, I will have the opportunity to discuss this topic, and we will address it using three of my favorite topics, which are change, leadership, and strategy, of course. And to do so, I have the honor and the pleasure to have here with me our Chief of Staff, Bob Williams, and our Chair in Residence, Stuart Noakes, from our CXO in Residence team. So as I was saying to them before start recording, I'm feeling very small today because I'm surrounded by giants, which is great. I'm going to learn a lot, and hopefully we're going to deliver a lot of useful content for you and value in the end. So let's start by asking Bob and Stuart to introduce themselves. I know Stuart is not necessary, but it's part of the scheme. So Bob is Bob Williams, for those who still don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Pedro. So yeah, my name's Bob Williams. My current full-time role is that I'm the Group Vice President for Executive Development in Teleperformance. For those who don't know it, Teleperformance is a huge giant company, 420,000 employees around the world. Basically, when you phone someone, we generally pick up the phone for them and solve your problems. We do a hell of a lot more. We're into digital business solutions now, and really trying to keep at the front end. So why I feel even slightly qualified to be here. I'm not fully qualified, but it's because we generally support the startups that when they've got big, and we help them deal with the real world when they realize that there are customer issues out there, there are customer things to be solved. They generally call us in to help them manage all of that. So we do dip into what are now classed as the biggest companies in the world, but we help them grow because of that. So thank you very much for having me here today, Pedro. I will do my best.
Thank you for finding time to join us today. I know you have such a busy schedule, Stuart. So, who is Stuart? For that one still person in the universe that may still not know who is Stuart.
I'm still reeling from that 420,000 employee thing. That's crazy. I knew Teleperformance was of a certain size, but I didn't know it had reached that kind of volume. That's incredible.
It's a small-sized country.
Yeah, yeah, it is,
Exactly.
right? Well, it's definitely. I mean, Exeter, where I am badged up for and have the banner for today, that is a city that's 155,000 people. So you've basically got three cities of Exeter as employees. That's just crazy. So by way of introduction, sorry, Pedro, for meandering as I sometimes do. And I believe when you become the chair of a board, you're allowed to do that stuff just on spec, right? But so I'm one of the co-founders of Canopy, and I've built incubators in Bangalore, Boston, Lisbon, and get involved in different things in the UK. I've attempted to build, I believe it's 9 companies of my own so far. I managed to get 4 through to some form of exit. And I currently sit on the boards of an unbelievable, actually, we tallied it up over Easter. I currently sit on 14 different company boards, assisting in the growth of those companies or the administration of them because they are more formally, more big, I guess you would say. So the largest institution I sit on the board of is about 50 million in revenue at the moment, and the smallest is an early stage MVP type company.
All right.
And 2 of those companies are 100% employee owned, I would like to say as well. So that means that we sold the company to a trust, and the trust has all the employees as beneficiaries. And so I sit on 2 of those companies in the UK. It's a very British specific type of company. You can only do that particular thing in the UK.
Which is sad because I think it should be exported to other countries, but one never
Mm.
knows.
It's a really good format, actually, and I'm only 3 years into knowing about this format and how to operate it with it, but I'm the independent trustee of the trusts that look after those companies, and it's a real privilege to be part of. Actually, it's quite something.
Yeah, I guess so. So I to start with our conversation, I prepared the list because there's so many that I decided to prepare a list so I wouldn't forget at least the most relevant ones. So COVID, climate change, war in Ukraine, growing tension in Southwest Asia, ChatGPT and the likes, and a lot of other things that some say are the end of the world as we know it. And my
But
first
you feel
question,
fine, right? Is that where you're going with this, Pedro? You feel fine?
yeah, and I think this small list gives a small idea of the changing moments that we are living in, which probably made us fortunate because we have the opportunity to live them all. And the first question I would like to, and I'll start by both, is are we really living in the uncertainty era, or it just became more visible with these recent events?
Wow. I don't think so. I think this is by far and away a more uncertain era. I think what you just listed out there, if we compare that to 5, 10 years ago, they weren't there. It wasn't that we couldn't see them. It's just they weren't there. There hadn't been a pandemic for quite some years. There certainly was no major war that's been really a threat to quite significant part of the world. So I would certainly say that no, this is a period of significant increased uncertainty.
Stuart, do you agree, or do you see differently?
I mean, one of the benefits of being old, Pedro, you know, in my 50 years on the planet now, you see quite a few things. And it's interesting that when I was a child in the UK, um, there were things even just in within that time span called the 3-day week, which
Mm.
was where in the UK there wasn't enough power generated for all of industry and commerce to keep running for 7 days a week, and you could only actually keep the lights on in your house for 3 days a week. And there was garbage strikes and things piled up in the street, and there were all sorts of trade union issues and huge amounts of disruption. There was even a 90% tax in the UK, which caused a massive brain drain, and that's within my lifetime. So there's always stuff going on.
Mm.
I think what we all got used to was a period of maybe a decade now of 0% interest rates and relative stability around the place. But I'll say my generation, but I think it's really the generation that comes after me, that this was the first generation that didn't face war in the way, didn't expect war in the way that the others had. And if you go back 100 years and you think about the different world wars that happened during that and the Vietnam crisis and so on, there was always some significant perturbation going on. And then we got used to stuff in that 10 years. We got used to a sense of tranquility and predictability, and markets got used to it, and our children got used to it. And we started to raise children in a way that expected tranquility. And then this pandemic thing, as you mentioned, really threw what's the British term, Bob? Bold and googly for everybody, right? It really affected a lot of people in a way that nobody was really expecting. But then what we've seen always in the last 40 years, 50 years, is an increased rate of change and a need to understand things and move in more and more agile ways. As we've become more digital and everything's becoming more connected, and the hyper connectivity that came with mobile phones, it's created an ecosystem where information flows quicker, actions can take place quicker. And now what we're really coming towards is that thing that's referred to as the singularity, and this point where artificial intelligence overtakes human intelligence in its ability to read situations and even make judgment calls. And we're either at or just before that singularity with a speed of change that I don't think any of us have ever come across. So I believe we're living in a time of very, very high degrees of uncertainty. I don't think that is atypical to a lot of history, of human history, but I do think the thing that underlines and undermines so much of it right now is the speed of that change. And I think, and I don't want to go on too much because I'm becoming Columbo myself in my monologues, but when you look at artificial intelligence and you look at the last 2 months since OpenAI and ChatGPT really started to do something that everybody bought into, and you look at the tens of millions of people that are now premium users of ChatGPT at $20 a month, you're talking about a 500 million, I think it is, revenue rate that's just come off the back of 2 months worth of something being available to people. And they didn't even have the premium version when it came out and people talked about it. And you look at auto GPTs and the scale and the recursive loops that come from that. This is a speed that we are unable to comprehend or keep up with as human beings. It literally is faster than we can ever be. And that's the thing that I think really is the uncertainty in today's moment. Yeah, I think that's as far as the chair should go on this one.
we'll go to AI a bit later, because if I have the sense that once we start talking about AI, it's gonna take us till to the end of the program. So let's try to talk about a few things before entering that main course, let's call it. You're saying something quite interesting. So we live in an era of stability because, for example, of low interest rates and close to zero inflation and so on. And on the other hand, you are talking about now the need of more agility and more ability to adapt on a faster pace, which is another way of describing a startup. And so you have a 10 years of more predictable world where startups started to flourish, and now the world moved to the place where startups are used to act. Are we entering the startup era because of that?
Bob, I just went on for far too long. Do you want to chip in on this one first?
Or a new startup era? Because actually, my point is, the world changed to the place where startups are normal, are native,
Yeah.
are used to navigate.
I think that yes, we are entering an era where startups are gonna have more opportunity, but I don't think it's the speed of change that's really the driver there. I think that what we've discussed before, and I do want to keep it away from AI and things like that as you've requested, it increases the opportunity for startups to challenge the incumbents, to challenge the behemoths and things like that. And I think that's the opportunity that makes it a startup world, because the large institutions still have this ability to be agile themselves. They can't be as agile because of legacy systems and things like that. But they have got a significant ability, like they always have. You know, the fintechs haven't thrown all the traditional banks out of banking yet, but as was promised, and the digital currencies haven't replaced everything quite yet. But there's a lot of opportunity there, and there are some big opportunities with the classic Revolut, where they've really made a dent in the market. So as I say, I think the new technologies, the way the world is going, is an opportunity for startups. But I think the agility is not the biggest driver in that opportunity, in my opinion.
And yours, Stuart?
I mean, Pedro, we obviously see things through our own lenses, right? So if I speak from my perspective across these different companies and the fact that I'm involved in colleges and schools, right? So I think the era of the entrepreneurial mindset is really coming about. It's often referred to this phase coming up. It seems to be referred to as the narrator economy, which I think is very interesting. And the narrator basically being, and not dipping too far into the AI, the ability to do the prompts of things which are then automated and potentially more intelligent than you, but to be able to guide them with the questions and the excuse me, the things you're looking for. But what's interesting for startups as a whole is how disruptive already things are starting to look for the scaling up side of startups. And Tiana did a really nice article last week actually around micro-SaaS and what that's really doing, and how to launch your own micro-SaaS. I think that's very interesting. And within this, what you're seeing is that, like, the things I've been reading and things I've been looking at around how the later stage VC market is really drying up and freezing at the moment, and in terms of sort of Series B, Series C's, because there's a really funny phrase which came out the other day, which is called zombie corn. Have you heard this phrase called the zombie corn? So in the last 3 years, as all this disruption's been happening, there's still been IPOs of tech companies, particularly on the Nasdaq and in the US. And at the moment, when you look at the balance sheets on them, the way it was reported is that the value of the money that's been invested into those companies is now more than the value of the company on the exchange. So they were potentially unicorns when they were floated, but now they've gone down. Even Salesforce has gone down like 85, 90%, right? So these things have gone down below their watermark. And so the preference shares that the investors had, the money that comes to them as in preference rights, is actually worth more than the company is worth. And that's both for later stage companies that haven't yet floated, but also the ones that are out there on the exchanges already. And there's a huge problem for later stage investors now, because those zombie corns, those companies, the founders don't want to work in them, and the share options aren't worth anything because the original investors have more rights than the value of the company is. And that's really screwing with the later stage of a lot of startups. So what's really flourishing at the moment, and where the blood's running to, where the money's running to in the market, is to seed stage stuff, to early stage stuff, to start again, basically, because so much is going to be screwed up. And that's not just the market, but it's also that micro SaaS stuff of Tiana's. So the ability with so much automation now is to reverse engineer and re-engineer anything that's successful incredibly quickly, and then offer it at a lower price point, to carve 30, 40, 50% out of the OPEX of big companies because of the level of automation that can happen. And the speed of this disruption is unknown because it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
So
again, just look to the last 2 months. It's insane.
So two phrases for you to comment. No, actually, what? But first, I'm going to comment on. So it's like that zombie thing is like post-money valuation is smaller than pre-money valuation in the end.
Yeah, basically. And if you look at just this week, I think it was Tiger Global marked down its portfolio by 20% because of this problem. That the money they paid in the investments, they were the most prolific and largest late stage investor in the world. And they're basically underwater in all their investments, and they've had to mark it down 20%. And that's seen and reported as too light. It's seen to be more like, or expected to be more like 60, 70% by the time this all works its way out.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, but that doesn't detract from, in fact, that re-emphasizes the entrepreneurial mindset, which is faced with a barrier, faced with a rock in the middle of the river, you've got to learn how to flow. What you can't do in the same way, and this is going to speak very contradictory to the advice that I'll give later on in the webinar, which is you can't just sit there and watch it anymore, because everything is changing around you faster than you can imagine. And part of that hype is in our own brains, but actually there's a lot of reality to that now.
Another thing you said, yeah, and I agree about micro SaaS, but it's like slicing a business and redoing things on a better way, which is pretty much what some startups that did, at least at the early days, with large corporations. They found an opportunity within the huge business of a large corporation, said, I can do that better. So I'll do it, and I'm just going to take over your business. To a certain extent, of course, and now it's micro SaaS is doing the same to traditional SaaS or something like that, which is funny because it's like the same kind of loop, but on new circumstances and with a new environment to some way, which and something that you just said make me remember something. I think all starts by the need of reinventing education. Because if we are the entrepreneurial area, or we are entering that, there's a certain mindset and a certain set of skills that are pretty much soft skills and not hard skills that should be brought to education to a broader extension that they are today. So, Bob, do you think education has anything to do with this, or is just me that seeing connections where they are not real or at least obvious?
I think it really does. Let's face it, the average curriculum in most countries that our kids are all learning hasn't been able to keep up with slow-paced change in the world, let alone what's going on now. So how, my 6-year-old boy can, we can think about how what he's doing now could adjust to the change in the world, to the 2 months that Stu refers to. Is just incomprehensible. All I can say is that the sort of education has been just completely democratized now. It's all over my Instagram feed what I can learn next. Prompt writing, like Stu says, it's all there. I think it's more there for people to find and follow, rather than the traditional what you're going to be taught. I don't have an answer to this. I didn't have an answer for the early 2000s and things like that. But now we're at just at that pace that your traditional sort of education is not there. I think it's really just going into that area where making sure people's curiosity is constantly stimulated is probably the best education that we can give people.
Stuart, I know you are very close to education for several reasons. I would love to hear your comments on this.
I mean, I think it's interesting actually. I mean, Bob's reflecting about a 6-year-old there, and I was playing with my son with ChatGPT a couple of days ago. It was the first time he'd been exposed to it, and I was just showing him a few different things, and we looked up about Minecraft and different games and so on. And then his curiosity just started to flow prompts in a way that I never would have thought of. And it was really interesting how his brain was made for the era of ChatGPT. It was super interesting, and the fact that he's 10 and started asking it about acrostic poems and stuff, I found really intriguing. It was just totally away from where I would have taken it. And I think we're in the era of micro learning, of keeping up through small amounts of education rather than long things. I think there's still a place for more institutional depth, if you like, in education, but I think it's a smaller place to play than it has in the last 20, 30 years. I think it's different to the way, say, our parents may have had expectations, or even we have expectations. But I think there's still an availability for all of it. But what I think is very interesting is when you take the Digital Athens concept, which was coined by MIT in I think it was 2016 or 2017, and the model under Digital Athens is the idea that, and this is I'm paraphrasing their words rather than my own, right? So if you look back at ancient Greece, the idea, there were a lot of interesting things that came out around philosophy and democracy and even science and medicine, and attributed to the enabling factor of that was basically that it was the first time in human history where people could really sit around and think about stuff, partly because they had slaves who did things that were finding food, growing food, cleaning things, and so on. And so there was this group of people that actually got to pontificate, to actually sit there and dwell a bit. And in their dwelling, they came up with all these other things. And the concept of Digital Athens is that the automation and the robotics and the things that are happening will basically make us redundant and give us lots of time to sit around and think. And the idea, they said, was here's the opportunity to really spend your time extending the human experience rather than worrying about all these other things which really can get done without you. Don't get me started on accountants and lawyers, because they kind of fall into that thing as well, but actually some of the more mundane things in your home and just general day-to-day life, right? So when you think like that, if you think past the chaos and into that zone, assuming that we're not completely annihilated by artificial intelligence or any robots along the way, what we'll have is an opportunity really for more education and more longevity, if you like, more deeper thinking, more looking at creativity, more looking at what is the joy in life rather than what is the work of life. And I think that's super interesting. Do you believe that? And do you, those things we talked about along the way around replication or removal of human beings from so many things and the disruption that comes from that? There's a reason the World Economic Forum says psychiatry will be one of the top 4 industries in the world over the next 20 years. It's because we need to be able to answer the question, where do I fit into things now, right? Because it's very curious. But in terms of education right now, I think it's about learning small, learning often, learning continuously, like good entrepreneurs do anyway, to keep up with and to be relevant to the movement of the world as it goes. It's one of the things I say on the master's course that I teach on the first day. Entrepreneurship is a doing word. It's a verb. It's something you've got to get up and do. You can't just sit here and think about it. And you are about to learn at a cadence higher than you've probably ever learned at before. Because if you're not learning fast in a startup and entrepreneur environment, you're not actually going to win. There's no way you can sit here and say, I've got everything I need. I don't really need to talk to anybody. I'm just going to do it. It doesn't work like that anymore. And it really doesn't work like that in a startup. You got to talk to everybody. You got to listen to everything. You got to make your own judgment call on it. And you got to force that path through the chaos to achieve what you're looking for. So those are really, again, chairship style, very long answer to your question, Pedro. And I feel, quite validated that I'm getting my own back on you right now for all the times you've done this to me. Sorry.
It's fair. It's fair. It's
Do
fair.
you mind if I just come back on that, Pedro? No, because it was really enlightening what Stu said there, because I coach as well, and one of the things when I've reflected as in doing the coaching is that we're these highly thought of people, we're trained to coach people, but 80%, good old Pareto stuff, 80% of really the value that we add is forcing people to stop and reflect. Exactly as Stu said there about digital Athens. We don't give answers as coaches, but we make people reflect, and we force them to reflect with the questioning that we give. And I think you absolutely nailed it there, Stu, in that people are now going to have that time to stop and reflect, and it's being able to reflect well when they do that. So perhaps to that extent, maybe the education that you talk of is going to be formed a little bit more around coaching and making sure that people, as you say, maintain that cadence of learning and curiosity by taking the time out to reflect that they've been gifted by the technology. Super interesting.
Well, as I predicted, this is the first of 74 1-hour conversations around the theme. Just picking on both of you just said, and going back to something you just said, Bob, I think the major role of a coach is to help the coachee reach the right questions. Is not put the right question, is help him or her reach the right questions, and then that person can find the answers with the help of others, or I would say it's better to help with the help of others, but well, one never knows. So getting back to another thing that Stuart said, I'm trying to skew all my questions in just one. It's not easy. You say it's funny because most of you talk about kids and about the way they think and reducing things, and made me remember that at the beginning, when Google appeared, it's all people were being trained how to use Google. Is like the real magic is in the question that you write to Google, because if you write the right question, you get the right answer. And now it's the same with AI, whatever. It's the prompt. So the magic is in the prompt. It's not exactly on the other side. Because what I think that all this is bringing is the same thing that the search engine brought us, was the ability to have access faster, deeper, for more information, and more information. Of course, now it adds some, let's say, the ability to work that information, not just display the information, but actually operate with that information. But it's just another step after what we had before. Before, you guys said we go to Google and we could see how many dishwashers were sold last year in the country started by a Z, or by a C, or that ever whatever. Now we can do more and more and more and more, but it's always because of the need. It's always because of the curiosity. It's always because of the human being behind the keyboard that is writing either the question at Google or the likes, or creating the right prompt to get the result. And that, I think, it's something that is not being discussed, or at least is being watched, but not seen as an opportunity. Once again, am I dreaming, or is this the real opportunity? They find the right prompts, and then because that implies defining the right problem.
What do you think, Bob? I've got a few views, but I'm conscious.
Let's go, Bob.
Go for it, Stu. Go for it.
So the narrative that I picked up on is this idea that obviously augmentation is key here, right? We are augmenting our own abilities. We're speeding things up. Great example would be the last blog post that I put together. I used ChatGPT on the topic first. It did 80% of the work. I finished off the article with my own style. It was published very quickly. The editors really liked it. And I did my work in less than an hour, whereas normally I give half a day to a day over to something like that, and a few peer reviews and stuff. And it was a good article, and it did its job. That's augmentation. And in the ChatGPT of 2 months ago, that was kind of where we were facing. And interestingly, only just the day before yesterday, I was in a discussion at the university. We were 4 of us talking about something, put into ChatGPT, well, what do you think about this? He came up with the answers. We all looked at it and went, yep, that's about it. That was the whole thing covered, like in 20 seconds. It was crazy. So augmentation, good. But what's already happening is the automation of that and the removal of the need the automated prompting now happening in the recursive loops. So that's the next phase after augmentation. Not everything will move to this, but the automation then takes the human element down to a minimal amount. And then the last part is what some people refer to as deprecation, or just the removal of the human need within that whole operation completely. And that's already being shown with some of the studies out of Stanford, things to do with creating agents with memory streams, creating recursive loops and dialogues between these agents and these automation pieces. So it's already shown that that path fully exists, where actually the narrator economy isn't needed anymore. And the one thing that I understand from this, and I'm not an expert in AI at all, but I'm obviously reading and learning a lot about it at the moment. The trust and safety layers at the moment are still human intervention, trust and safety layers. And what's super interesting as a concept to think about is what happens if you automate the trust and safety layer, if you take the human intervention out of it, what that will then do and where that will take that stuff. Because at the moment, into most of the large language models, there is a layer that stops certain questions and stops certain responses. And when that experiment of Dan, the do anything now thing happened with ChatGPT a couple of months ago, or quite near the beginning of the launch, that really took out that trust and safety layer, and they got some very curious responses. So there's all this stuff, but the general narrative seems to be augmentation, automation, and then just basically removal or deprecation, as some people have referred to it as. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see where that goes. Now, I know your biggest question always in all of this is, how do you navigate it, right? And particularly as a startup founder, if you're watching this, how do you tackle all of this stuff? And I think the simple answer to reflect on, at least, is nobody knows.
Yeah.
Because I could talk to my dad about it, and we can always talk to other individuals about it, and people who've lived on this planet longer than us, and none of them will have seen this before because it didn't exist before. We are navigating anew. This is not like saying there's a tribal elder group that we can go to and they can talk about the last time something similar happened, or when the floodwaters raised or whatever. It ain't that. It's completely different. This is not moving from agricultural industry to agricultural economy to industrial, or even industrial to more digital or knowledge. This is a completely different world.
Well, so many notes. Bob.
I don't have an awful lot to add to that, to be quite honest. Needless to say, Stu's covered a ton of it. I'll just recount a little vignette that I was in the car for an hour with someone who has his own AI business, has had it for 20 years, has worked on this, stays fully up to speed. And I said to him, I do a lot of, I think I do a lot of work in here. I use it for what I need to use it, but I feel like I'm a million miles behind it, the curve. And he said, honestly, I work in AI. I write AI, I do all of this, and I feel the same. It is this really is the period of uncertainty, as we say. There's no one to turn to, and it just does something new every day that we never really considered, and we're rewriting the playbook every single day as to how, even the capabilities. It's just a phenomenal time. It really is, and as Stu has already mentioned, the difference between GPT-4 and Auto GPT with the recursive loops is just another step that in times gone by would have taken 10 years to write, and it came out a month later. So it's phenomenal. It really is.
One thing I prepared to reflect on with you today, Pedro, was really was something that I've taken away from the Bristol ecosystem and working within that, and it's really related to the coping side. So what they do within Set Squared in Bristol and within that ecosystem as a whole is they prioritize something which I never would have prioritized for early stage startups. And it's one of the learnings I've had from being involved there. And it's that they drill from the very beginning of the very earliest stage of the startup, getting your board of directors up and running and working that for the strength of the startup. Now, I'm always the opposite. I'm evolving up to a board of directors, 1 or 2 years, get the MVP stuff sorted, go as agile as you can before you get near that. But they do it the opposite. And there's been, I think, 5 unicorns to come out of Bristol now. And it's a city of about 450, 500,000 people. So that's a pretty good batting average, right? And all of them have interfaced or come through in one way, shape, or form the Set Squared program, where this board thing was kind of drilled into them. And what it is it basically gives them, even if the board's only 3 or 4 people, a reflection a regular reflection, and a regular steering of collective wisdom. That even in the most chaotic times, even in the earliest, most agile times, that wisdom happens. And the Set Squared program gives a thing called a business review panel every 6 months, which is basically the board you can't afford until you can afford your own board and bring people in. And that usually comes as a function of funding and stuff. And that brings 5 or 6 advisors together to sit and look at your company like a board and to challenge you as a founder, and also to give you advice and thoughts from outside your own bubble. And I think that's a really huge part of how that ecosystem has thrived. And I think it's a really fundamental part of how we all maybe could position ourselves to cope with this next piece, which is, what is our own board? What is, as if you treat yourself as a brand, if you treat yourself as a company, or you and your family as a company, or whatever the group is that you associate with, to then say, okay, how do we do this? How do we do our board meetings? How do we make our strategic decisions? How do we dissect the world and do it collectively with the wisdom of that group through, rather than do it in isolation, which is perhaps something we might be more tempted to do. That was my random reflection before today.
Part of my secret there is I have the pleasure of and the honor of doing these type of episodes where I learn from smarter people.
And I have to say, I mean, I know I'm biased, right? But the In Residence group, we've been running since December, and I've learned so much from the group as a whole, and we've covered so much ground in just these few short months as well. It's a really interesting group for me, and I get a lot from it. I feel quite privileged to even, to be in these loops with everybody. It's quite special.
Yeah, indeed. You were saying, well, there's just I'll just choose one. Actually, I'm going to use one to introduce the other. Sorry, no one knows, and I was thinking, this is like speeding the history of mankind, and like in the same year or the same week or whatever time frame you want, we come from Neanderthal to discover fire, and sooner we're going to have cars and so on. And so it's all the revolutions, but in a row, but without taking centuries. And of course, the speed between revolution has been decreasing a lot from revolution to revolution, but now we are compressing them to weeks or months, not to years, which is great and it's funny. And but it's as in those times, no one knows because there's a joke I was told when I was thinking of becoming an entrepreneur, that a guy was selling hay to horses, and he sees passing a car, and he says to his partner, "Hey, you see that? That's new. That's weird." That guy said, "Don't worry. No one's going to buy that. Let's keep having hay to sell to the horses. No one's going to buy crap like that. And people will keep using horses to do whatever they need to do." And of course, we know who bankrupt first. But using this, and it's referred to human element, a human element with AutoGPT and those likes, which brings me to a fundamental doubt I have. Probably one of the most relevant characteristics of a startup founder is having a dream and doing whatever it can to actually build whatever he dreamed of, for the problem that he or she identified. And now, can we predict that all this will be done automatically? Or that's the secret source of mankind, the ability to dream and to find, there's an opportunity for me to do better, there's an opportunity to do differently, there's an opportunity to serve someone who's not served? Or can we honestly believe that sooner than later that will be also automated? Bob, let's talk about you this time.
Well, there's the Armageddon answer to that, which is, eventually it will get clever enough that it can dream things up. But I do believe that it's I think the other thing, that is the quality of a good startup founder, is the ability to pivot. And I just think that, everything that's going on at the moment is just going to mean that pivots happen a lot quicker. And they're more considered, and they come, maybe on a monthly basis as opposed to a quarterly basis. So that's where I think the increased agility has to come in. But as we currently stay, and I even quote the time. It's 7:50 here in San Francisco. By 8 o'clock, it could have all changed. They could have released something new, but at the moment, it's the dream is there, and and the I think the skill of the startup founder is to have some element of reflection and understanding, as Stuart mentioned, into the tools that are out there and how they can be applied to that dream.
Stuart, please.
I think that chess has already shown us a role model pathway of how now AI is regarded as the standard against which humans are measured. And that's one of the most intriguing, most difficult, most complex places where decisions are made and long-term strategies are done. I think, the recent cheating incidents were all because somebody was too correlated with what the AI would have done, and they just couldn't believe that he as a grandmaster could be that consistent, and they looked into the evidence of him cheating accordingly. And I think that there's a lot about the human existence that can and will be supplanted, to just surpassed by what's coming in the world. And what we have to do as humans is to recognize that firstly, we may not be the most intelligent thing on the planet for much longer, and work out how we rise above that, or how we ride that wave in Nazare type terms, to really continue and extend the human existence with those as tools or companions, or even as superiors within the world that we go into. But this again comes down to this, on what I refer to as the entrepreneurial mindset, right? How do you leverage it? How do you borrow it? How do you augment it or use it to augment you? How do you grab other resources that you don't own and actually make them useful in your purpose? And how do you keep having a vision to move past that, which is what entrepreneurs do more than other people, right? Now, what's curious, of course, is that the entrepreneurial mindset and criminal mindsets are incredibly closely matched in psychiatrists and psychological terms, right? So does that mean that the whole of the human race will become more criminalistic? I don't know. But I think that this entrepreneurial mindset of how do I use this? How do I work with this? How do I flow with this? I think is going to be a key part of it. And to your point, and to the things we've already discussed, reflection and looking and considering is probably one of the biggest tools that we're going to need during that phase, rather than panic and immediate action. It's like, how do you sit back from this? How do you really appreciate it? How do you work out where the right place is for you in this?
Okay. I I don't. I must assure that we don't have discussion without topping a subtopic, which is we now have BIST, that it's data sets and generates not just access to information, but generates knowledge, and is starting to self-generate itself. But my biggest concern, honestly, is shouldn't we start thinking how to not control, because I dislike the word, but how to address the question of who is feeding the beast and how is the beast being fed by, because if this has all this power, someone with some intent can feed systems in a certain way to generate a certain result on a faster and incredibly powerful and broader way that we have ever seen. I remember Cambridge Analytica problem at website being discussed every session was about that, and now we have a beast, huge beast, and no one is actually looking into the data sets. Should we do it? Can we do it? What are your thoughts on this,
Bob?
Of course, one of the big things is program bias. That is something that's very big in artificial intelligence at the moment. It's there. We're absolutely aware of it. We have to be very careful of it, and yeah, that's something there. I think what was particularly interesting in me is when ChatGPT is asked, what are the major roles of the future, or the major job titles of the future? One of the first ones that always comes up is ethical AI lawyers and things like that, and it knows itself that it needs an ethics base around it.
Or was it, sorry, or was instructed to answer always that?
Maybe, but yeah, it's not that that's the answer that it gives, but I think everyone, and there was the group letter that was signed a while back to slow things down and understand what's going on, and whatever you want to believe about the politics of that, but yeah, I truly believe that there's a lot of people out there who are very concerned about that exact question that you asked, that it can be guided in a certain direction if we pump it with that kind of information. So I think the ethical component is going to be something that's going to be widely viewed in the future.
I mean, Pedro, you're asking a super appropriate question. I went to an amazing talk the other week where one of the ex-product people from Google who'd worked on Bard, she was talking about this and where the data sets are training the AIs, etc. And she had some very interesting and sort of mind-blowing perspectives. But and I'll share some of those with you maybe on a different call. But one of the things that I reflected on a little bit is we're part of a community of entrepreneurs, right? And everywhere we go, and certainly my life is spent almost entirely spending time with entrepreneurs. When we look around at all our friends and all the people, and even ourselves, we're curious and abnormal types. We really are, right? We do such unreasonable and dumbass things at times, and that's what makes us entrepreneurs. That's we've all got these lenses where we've seen the world in a different way, been absolutely obsessively annoyed and frustrated by it, and we've chosen to change things accordingly. And it's entrepreneurs that are leading the way on this stuff. And I don't know, I mean, curious and normal people do great things, but they also do crazy things. And I'm not sure they're the most stable people to be leading this level of change through the world, right? And the influence will be felt for a very long time about what all this is. Or it may just be the curiosity and the abnormality of these people that actually cause it to completely crash and burn, because we will push things further than maybe they should be pushed or could be pushed, unless it's us pushing them, right? So I don't know where that's all going to go, but for coping and for managing and for steering our startup journeys, I definitely feel reflective time, collective wisdom, and constant dialogue are massive tools for us. And that's constant dialogue with teams, constant dialogue with customers, constant dialogue with marketplaces, constant dialogue with communities. Just keep looking around and understanding, how do you fit? How do you flow with things? How do you not sit like a rock in the river?
You were saying constant dialogue, and I fully agree. And my brain was making one of those weird connections that only my brain does. Isn't it faster to just ask ChatGPT instead of spending time chatting with guys on a Zoom call?
As long as the data set's up to date, absolutely. It's still a couple of years behind, even on 3.5, right? So, yeah. But I think the less effective Bard is more contemporary, right? It's got active live data sets going through it, like real time stuff.
Yeah, but I'm because I agree with you. I'm afraid that people listen to this and say, well, that's funny. I would love to do that. It sounds wonderful, but I don't have time. So I'll just keep asking ChatGPT and skip all that part of human connection and having conversation and building boards. I have a board. It's called ChatGPT. And I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just trying to avoid that. Bob, your thoughts on this?
I'm having a big reflection here, and I think it's quite fascinating that we're having a discussion, and the two ends of the discussion are the Greek Stoics and AI, but it's amazing that they can coexist in the same discussion, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. The discussion about the Stoics and having the first time in history having time to stop, pontificate, reflect, and everything else there. I think one of the other messages of the Stoics is really, control the controllables. And I think, from a startup perspective, in that reflection, you've got to really start putting, a line down the middle of the page and saying, what can I control? I can't control where AI is going. I can control how I use it today, and make sure that I'm there and I'm using it, today. I can't control the impacts of the war in Ukraine, but I can control how I strengthen up my business, with respect to any things that might happen. So yeah, as I say, it's been a hugely reflective session. But I'm entirely there with Stu, and I'm not just saying that, but I think the way that the conversation there is literally honed in on one thing that AI can't do, despite what you might have just mentioned there, Pedro, is just sit around with your mates, kick back, crack open a bottle of beer and just say, what should we do? And let's stop and really think about this and whatever, or a cup of coffee if you're not a beer drinker. But it's that stopping, reflecting, and talking to those people around you who, might not be experts, but could give you a human view on something. I think it comes down to something so incredibly simple when there's so much amazing technology out there.
I guess I build on that concept of the mate sitting around thing as well, Bob. I think one of the Canopy tenets is really strong for this next era, which is diversity is strength.
Yeah.
Now,
yes.
we are three gentlemen of a certain age and a certain type on this call saying that, but one of the things that I find amazing through the community that we're all part of is the diversity of mindsets, of worldviews, of places people come from and how they've grown up and what they're doing, gives us this amazing richness of discussion and gives us the opportunity to see through all these different lenses of quite incredible creative people. And even that event that I went to, that Elizabeth took me to the other week, I went into that room not knowing what I was going to learn, and I came out of it literally with my worldview changed. And that was thanks to her and her introduction, which it was a place, even as a fairly up-to-date person who proactively looks for stuff, I didn't even have that on my roadmap. And that's thanks to the value of our community that I was able to be in that room, and thanks to her for thinking it was a wise thing to do to take me, because I had no idea it was going to be a good move. But that strength through diversity of opinion, of viewpoint, of lens, I think it's massive for right now, and it's what good boards do anyway, right? They refer to it in the academics as external scans, like bringing in the outside world to your decision process, not making a decision in isolation, not being in your little bubble, which seems counterintuitive when you're trying to be an entrepreneur, because you're trying to just get the small stuff done and get it moving, but you've still got to bring the world into your view to say, okay, that makes sense. That's not going to get in my way, or that regulatory change is actually going to help me, or that AI is actually going to be an enabler, not a problem. Or now I can see the AI, my idea will pivot to this. But you've got to bring that world into your decision. You've got to bring it wider than your bubble might be used to really make us a wise decision in today's context.
I have to say this. One of the things I love at Canopy and other places I go is every time I have a problem, I always think, who is the smart people I know that knows about this, has done this before, or has experienced this before, that I can just call or reach very, very fast. And it's amazing. And it's funny because some people, I think that's part of what defines us. A lot of people are so focused on what they do, they don't have time for serendipity. And I had this conversation of this with someone who says, you waste so many time talking to so many different people. Why are you wasting time talking to that guy? And I said, because I never know. I never know. And the more people I know, the more interesting people I know, and I know that every day I have more doubts than the previous day, and so I need to know more and more smart people that I can go to, because sooner or later I'm gonna need that, and so I have to invest X amount of my time, which I do, knowing new people, meeting new people, and I don't have a directory. I have it in my head, but every time I face someone that is challenging, my first thought is, who do I know that can help me with this? And not help me as in do for me, but help me as in teach me, share.
Help me dissect it, right? Help me take this apart, work out what to do with it. Absolutely.
All right, so we have 4 minutes, two for each of one of you, and this is what I'm about to ask you. It's impossible, but just in 2 minutes. because of everything that we've been addressing in the last 56 minutes, and I'll start by you, Bob, this time. Some tips for a founder on how to lead his or her company, startup, actually, in these times as we define them. Useful, direct, practical tips.
I'm going to go back to what I just said, and it is control what you can control, and make sure you're good at controlling what you can control. I mentioned earlier, the speed of pivoting. So when things are more uncertain, you've got to think about that. And I am old school, but I know it still works. And I've actually asked ChatGPT to do it for me as well. And it's that SWOT analysis. It's the oldest tool out there.
Yeah.
But whenever something just gets uncertain, sit back, reflect, SWOT, and understand what the market's bringing to you again. And if you take control, if you take that, and then you control what you can control, then you're increasing that ability. But comes down to the core theme of this discussion: stop, reflect, and everything else. So yeah, that's mine.
Awesome.
I love the SWOT thing, Bob. And ultimately the heart of all of that is leverage your strengths to capture the opportunities. Yeah. And keep looking out to the world as well as internal to yourself. And it's very easy, particularly for an engineer or a scientist, to look inside more than outside. So it encourages us to balance those, but leveraging the strengths to capture the opportunities, knowing what the strengths are consciously is a really important part of that. And then saying, well, there's a bid opportunity, or there's a crazy thing I could be doing. Am I gifted to do that? Am I prepared? Can I actually use a strength to do it? Or am I trying to write with my non-dominant hand, as Biraj might say if he was here on the call, right? Am I trying to capture it through a phase of learning? Well, that's going to be slow, and that's going to be clunky, and that's going to be uncomfortable, and that's going to be difficult. So I need to leverage those strengths. And I think it's a really great point. And I'm sure Biraj would love to talk to you about Gallup strengths coaching and the things that he does with that. It's quite enlightening. For me, I mean, I'm very much of the same mindset as Bob. I would just kind of layer on top of that, which is this diversity thing. I think when you're sitting back and you're reflecting, it's important as a founder to bring in viewpoints from people around you. And Pedro, you and I, we have a very similar mindset, I guess, in the sense of whenever I'm stuck, I literally, if I can't answer it, if I've worked as hard as I can and I just don't know how to do it, I make a list of 5 people that I think are smarter than me in this topic. I call them, I share the problem. And if at the end of those 5 calls or lunches or breakfast, whatever they are, there's still no answer, I give up and I go and do something else, right? Because that's as good as it gets. But find your own little group, your diverse group that you can lean into and they can lean into you, and keep bringing yourself back into that group and asking curious questions of the moment, like, how do I use it? How do I work with it? How do I flow with these situations? Where am I trying to take it? And then do like Bob's saying, control the things you can control, and have a bit of acceptance in your life for the things you can't control, right? And that I say that as a 50-year-old that still can't do it, right? But that acceptance piece is fundamental to probably longevity and mental well-being along the way, right? Can you actually accept things can't be done by you or controlled by you?
Yeah, indeed. Great topics, great tips, very useful ones, great conversation. Just before finishing, just said, I also love SWOT, and it's funny referring to strengths and opportunities and focus on that. Best definition I know of success, which by the way is the same of the definition of luck, is when the line of preparation crosses the line of the opportunity, then you get lucky, then you get lucky. And this also adds to something that we're going to discuss on the future episode, which is self-awareness, which is critical to ensure that you see the opportunity and you know that you are ready, and then you get lucky and later you'll be successful. And this way we end up to this month's episode of How to Series from Canopy Community. I'm very sad because I was about to start. I was getting really excited at all the discussions, but we just have 1 hour. We just finished it. I'm sure we'll get back to these topics with these wonderful guests. Let me just thank you once again, both Bob and Stu. Hope you enjoyed also, and especially from you that are watching this. I hope this was useful to you and can help you deal with these times that we are facing. I think there are a lot of great news There are always opportunities behind change, but it's up to us to find them and to find a way to actually develop something that takes benefit of those changes. Have a great month. See you next month. Once again, thanks, Bob. Thanks, Stuart. Wish you all a great day and a great month.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, bye-bye now.
Bye, guys.